Hey, thank you all for tuning in. My name is Jonathan Howard. I'm the co-executive director of Feed the Soul Foundation, along with Dr. Ashley S. Atkins, who's also here on the call. And we literally couldn't be more excited about our first ever, our inaugural Soul session.
Woo!
Feed the Soul is a 501c3 organization that is geared toward helping marginalized culinary business owners to get the business development resources and the funding that they need. And these soul sessions are a huge part of feeding the soul of those restaurant owners and culinary business owners, which in turn we believe help to feed the soul of communities all over the country. Now, you can't start any culinary establishment or any business for that matter without money. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. And we have probably one of the most experienced and great experts in the country to talk about that today, and Miss Asia Beard. We'll let her tell you a little bit more about her experience and who she is and how she got to where she is today and why she's qualified to advise you. But we couldn't be happier to have her here with us and also to have her as one of the finance consultants for Feed the Soul Foundation. So she'll be working with restaurants from around the country over the next 6 months to make sure that they are poised for sustainability. And that's what she's going to help you all to do here today. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Miss Asia Beard. I yield the floor.
Ooh. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I truly appreciate that wonderful introduction. Again, my name is Asia Beard. I am the founder and principal consultant of Ask Asia Restaurant Consulting. We're actually based out of Los Angeles, California. My personal background, I've been in hospitality a little over 26 years. The last 2 years, though, I did open up my own consulting firm because I realized the last 18 years before that, I've been opening up restaurants throughout the country, both in Las Vegas and in Los Angeles and 14 other cities. And I was just helping other people, follow their dream. And so I've worked in fine dining, catering, brick and mortar casual restaurants, and also help clients with opening up food trucks. So I'm excited to share my knowledge. I'm really, really big. You hit it on the head about capital. I'm really big on restaurants being profitable. You can have amazing food, you can have a great service experience, but you haven't set up the foundation of being profitable, you're not going to be in business very long. And so what my company focuses on is helping restaurants build the foundation for long-term success. We do that through business coaching, online webinars like these. And then we also focus on health inspection preparation. We want to make sure that you are not only profitable, but serving food safely. So without further ado, we're going to start up with budgeting for restaurants. Now, you do know a little bit about me, so I just want to share some housekeeping tips really quick. If you could please keep your microphones on mute. I appreciate you coming today, and we will definitely take questions. Utilize the chat box for that. We'll try to answer those questions at the end. But this is a great opportunity to network and learn. There's nothing better than peer mentorship. So there may be some other folks on this webinar that are local to you, have a similar concept, and you can learn from each other. So definitely take advantage of that. I always like to start with a quote of the day. And if there's anybody here with a financial background, this will ring very true to you. So number one, behind every good business is a great accountant. You have to be able to tell the story of your business through your numbers. So not just on Instagram, not just on Facebook, but when I look at your P&L, I need to know what systems are working and what systems we need to improve upon. And I will do that immediately just by looking at the numbers that you've put together. One of the struggles that we ran into when the pandemic first happened, a lot of the clients that I work with are small business owners. They just didn't have their paperwork in order. So when it became time to apply for those loans, the EIDL loan, the PPP loan, and even some of the grants, they didn't have that paperwork digitized or even ready to go. We just couldn't apply for them. So we want to make sure that you're ready to go with that. Now, our agenda today is really to focus more on the startup businesses, what you need to put into place before you start your restaurant. Now, if you already are in business, I'm happy for you and I'm excited. Hopefully you can still take some golden nuggets out of this and take it back into your business. But we want to make sure that the people who are just getting into it, just getting their feet wet a little bit, they understand what to look for and have a general overview of accounting, You're not going to graduate and have a CPA after this, but you will have a working knowledge of what to look for in your restaurant in order to make sure it's profitable. So that's our agenda for today. Let's first start off with some of the 3 financial mistakes that a lot of my new clients make that I want to help you prevent from making. First and foremost, underestimating the capital that they need. The restaurant industry, the food business is not a get-rich-quick scam, right? It's not even a get-rich-quick business. There's a lot of overhaul that you're going to need to put into, a lot of capital up front, and it takes a lot of time to get that money back. Profit margins are very, very thin, and that is normal for our industry. And so you need to be prepared. You need to have liquid capital in the bank, and that needs to be available to you at the beginning of the venture, not halfway through it. Another big mistake that a lot of them make will not account for all of the different business expenses that come with this industry. So I get a lot of folks who have been in different industries and are pivoting into a restaurant business. So maybe their initial thought is, oh, we just need enough money to cover labor or food and rent. But there could be about 40 or 50 other line items on their P&L that they just weren't prepared for. So we want to make sure you're prepared for all of those different expenses that are going to come through. And then the other big thing is the big ticket business expenses, the food costs, labor costs. You don't take time to figure out what it should be, what is manageable, what is necessary in order to provide the level of service that they want. So if you don't cost those things out, it can prevent you from planning for profitability. So let's make sure that we don't make these mistakes, that you're armed with this knowledge, and we're gonna get you right on the right track. So why budget? Why take an hour, potentially an hour and a half out of your day to sit with me and talk about the exciting world of restaurant accounting? So number one, it is your plan to be profitable. You have to make sure that you have a plan in place. You want to be proactive. It should not be something that you are reacting to 2-3 months down the line or the 3rd quarter in trying to figure out what you need to be doing in your restaurant. You need to be proactive ahead and get ahead of the 8 ball. You have to be able to set a target. If you don't know what to hit, if you don't have a target in place. What's my daily sales goal? What's my weekly sales goal? What's my monthly? What's my average check going to be? You have to know these things ahead of time in order to hit these goals. And the other big thing is system accountability. I mentioned earlier, I can look at someone's P&L and I can tell you what's wrong in that restaurant just by looking at the P&L without having stepped foot in it at all. So your P&L, those systems, it'll come through if you are not doing something correctly in your restaurant. If your food cost is too high, we've got maybe potentially a waste issue, or we've got a theft issue. We've got some accountability issues. If your labor cost is too high, maybe you've got too many people on the schedule. Maybe you've got too many people working overtime. So we will look at those things and we'll break them down. So first and foremost, let's figure out what should our budget be. I work with 3 different small business development centers, and across all of them, I get several people, several times a year that come to me. I've got $10,000. I want to start a food truck. I've got $50,000. I want to start a restaurant. And they're grossly underestimating what this industry is going to require you to have to do it right. So in 2020, Restaurant Owner, which is a website that you can subscribe to, it's an industry website. I highly recommend that you take advantage of that. They surveyed 350 restaurant owners, all in different spaces in their journey, just to find out what their startup costs were. And that ranged from $175,000 to $750,000. And this is for a full service restaurant with a bar. So we're not talking, the kind of small hole in the wall, just takeout spot, but, a full blown restaurant. They divided these restaurants into 3 categories. You've got the smaller restaurant, 65 seats or less, which will be that lower quartile. A medium-sized restaurant, anywhere from 66 seats to about 120. And then the larger restaurants, which were about 121 seats, up to 176. And I want you to look at on this survey the total startup cost for each of those categories. Look at what it costs per square foot, the seat, construction. So these are usually expenses that somebody that hasn't worked in a restaurant or hasn't opened a restaurant before may not be anticipating. So we want to make sure that you are prepared with this knowledge before jumping into it. When you look at this survey, just a little snippet to continue it, I want you to look for the annual sales, how long it took them to be profitable, and the profit margin percentages. That shows up in the last part of that survey. So again, annual sales for the smaller location, $550,000. Do you remember how much it cost? 175 just to start. The medium-sized restaurant, 1.12 million. I want you to look at here where it's got the annual profit. First column is 0. Second column is 71,000 off of the 1.1 million. And then the third column at 1.8, pushing 2 million, 168,000. Look at the profit percentages. So I'm not saying this to scare you. If you are passionate about this, if you have a fire, if you feel this is your purpose, this is your calling, and you are supposed to open a restaurant and share the food that you can create out of love, I want you to do that. I want you to share that gift with the world. But I want you to also be prepared on how to be profitable when you do it. All right, let's go through some accounting terminology, and I'm going to keep this very high level, but I want you to at least have, a working knowledge of what these terms are. First and foremost, we start with an annual budget. What is our operating budget? It's a prediction of all of those expected revenues, expenses, anything that's going to happen in that first 12 months. Okay, if I'm buying signage, equipment, maybe catering vans, everything, everything that I anticipate will happen. It's not fact yet, it's just what I'm anticipating. I want to be prepared, and I want to put it all into a spreadsheet where I can look at it and compare expenses versus revenue. It's also going to show my gross sales versus my net sales. That's going to refer to those cumulative sales over a specific period of time. But remember, net sales is what really matters. So what we gross, think about your paycheck, what you potentially gross if you're still an hourly employee, what you were paid per hour times the amount of hours you worked is very different from what is actually deposited into your bank account. We've got taxes that come out, insurance that comes out. Maybe you've got a 401k. Maybe there's some other expense that you have coming out. And what matters is what's getting deposited into that bank. So it's the same when we're looking at that annual operating budget. We want to understand that variance. There's also 3 different types of expenses that you'll have. There's a fixed expense. Expenses that are not going to change. It doesn't matter what happens in your business. So if you have 20 people come in, if you have 200 people come in, this expense will stay on that balance sheet regardless. So a fixed expense is something we really want to get a handle on. We want to know that ahead of time. We can estimate that. It's going into that spreadsheet. Variable expense, however, though, that's going to be an expense that fluctuates. It'll change depending on that business activity. And this is usually where myself and my team, we come in and we look at those variable expenses. Let's maybe think of some examples. I want to see if the audience can share a few examples of what they consider a fixed expense and then what they consider a variable expense. And I don't know if I can see the chat, but maybe someone can share if someone's typing in the chat.
So I don't see anything in the chat yet.
Okay. I'm going to put some expenses out there so that we have some examples. So,
can we just unmute ourselves?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Can we just unmute ourselves? Okay. So a fixed expense would be your lease, your monthly
absolutely
rent, and then a variable expense would be the light bill or the gas bill.
There you go. It's going to change exactly based on business activity. Okay, there's a few other examples. What other examples can we come up with, audience? How about salaries? If you have a general manager and you've signed a contract, you're going to pay them $80,000 to run your location. Is that a fixed or a variable expense?
Taking a wild guess. Fixed.
Boom. Yes. I need a little bell. Yes, that is a fixed expense, but there is an expense called semi-variable. So sometimes labor will fall into that because we have a mixture of both fixed and variable expenses. So if I have an hourly employee, let's say they're making $16 an hour, they normally work 40 hours a week, but I need to reduce my labor, so I cut them down to 32 hours a week. Is that a fixed expense or variable expense?
Variable?
There you go. You got it. So exactly. So this is what I'll focus on. I'll focus on the variable expenses, the things that I know we can control based on the business activity. So when I come into a location and help do some consulting with them, I can't really focus too much on their fixed expenses. I have to focus on the variable expenses, their food costs, their labor costs, others, vendors that they're paying that we can maybe, stop those agreements or modify those agreements, things that we can actually control based on the business activity.
So we have a comment in the chat. He said hourly wages are variables. Some vendors' purchases are variables. Rental lease is fixed.
Very good. Excellent. Good job. I can't see the comment box, but good job to that person. Yes. Okay. So let's talk about a couple more accounting terms that are actually very specific to the restaurant industry. Average check. This is an estimate of what you expect each person to spend when they dine with you. So I am not able to do a budget unless you know what your average check is. And we figure that out. We look at your menu. We think, what do we think people are going to spend every time they come in here? It's not always going to be the most expensive thing, and it's not always going to be the least expensive thing. So if I have a coffee shop, I'll probably have a different average check than a fine dining restaurant. But let's say I'm a coffee shop. Maybe my average check is $8.50. Doesn't mean every single person that walks through is going to be spending $8.50. I may have a person that comes in and buys that $3 drip coffee special. And then I have somebody else that comes in and buys, a specialty latte with oat milk and an extra shot and that almond croissant and a breakfast sandwich. And now they've spent $16. So we're averaging those together and we're going to take that number. We're going to use that to help us with our projections and with budgeting. So we need to know what the average check for each person, for each restaurant when we work with them. Now for dine-in service, there's table turns. So every time a restaurant reseats a table, it's called a turn. So the more table turns we have in the location, the more opportunities we have to increase our sales. So if I'm a fine dining restaurant and I have a 6-hour dinner service and I've got 25 tables, I want to try to get those tables turned as often as possible within that 6 hours. If I let people kind of just sit around, we don't really upsell them, get them out, drop the check, and kind of keep it moving, then that table is very limited on how much revenue is going to bring to the restaurant. So we want to make sure we're looking at table turns. So as we put together budgets or we put together projections, we will take into account how many table turns we're going to get. On average, 2 at least. And in some cases, some really aggressive cases, sometimes it's closer to 3, and that's great. But if we see that a restaurant is really struggling to get 1.5 turns, then there needs to be a whole retraining for the service staff on how to get those tables turned a little bit faster. So these are some terminologies you want to familiarize yourself with, so you can start putting those numbers together as you put together your budget. All right, so where do we start? Now, I am a fan of technology. Please use technology to organize all of your expenses. Have a QuickBooks, subscription, or if you're really great with Excel, use a spreadsheet. A lot of POS systems have apps already built in that they'll interface either with QuickBooks or they have their own proprietary software that you can use, but use it. A lot of discovery happened during the pandemic where I was still finding restaurants handwriting everything. They've got a file cabinet, which is great that you filed and you saved everything. But if I can't quickly, grab data for a set period of time without going through each individual file and manually adding it up on a calculator, we are not running efficiently, and we are not making the best use of that owner's time, but also we're going to miss a lot. So please use technology to help organize those expenses. And you'll always start with the common annual expenses. So there's always a spreadsheet that I start with, and we just start filling in those annual expenses. So let's get some ideas about the typical annual expenses that you would find in a restaurant. We talked about a few already with those fixed and those variable expenses. We know there's rent, we know there's labor, we know there's, your food. But what are some other common annual expenses? I bet that we can get to at least 20 just right here in the audience. So we can either take ourselves off mute or we can type them in the chat. Just jot out a few others.
Maybe like taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and these are expenses that every restaurant is going to have to deal with. Mm-hmm. So we were at 4. I want us to get to 20.
Let's see. Like she said, feel free to unmute yourselves, guys, and chime in or write in the chat.
Absolutely,
Internet.
good one.
In a restaurant, of course, you have maintenance and
Absolutely.
like trash company.
Somebody
Insurance,
said
very
insurance.
good.
Yeah.
How about pest control? Right, every restaurant, you got food, you got people, you got doors opening and out. Those pests are going to sneak in, so you need to have a PCO, a pest control operator, coming in and spraying. How about somebody that's handling marketing? You need a budget for that, right? So we're already at 10. Licensing, very good. Yes, licensing. Okay, and insurance. When you mentioned that, Jared, it's not just business insurance. Workers' comp insurance, EPLI insurance. If you vehicles, car insurance. Okay, there's tons more. I want us to at least hit the 20, so we're at 11. Very good. Yes, all of your disposables. Every time, you gotta order a case of napkins, forks, to-go clamshells, all of that. Subscriptions, we have to have a music license. Unless you're playing the radio, you've got to have a music license, so you need a subscription for that.
That's a good one that I never thought
of. Transportation or vehicles.
You're going to need office supplies, right? You're going to have an office where you're going to have to sit down, whether it's to do your paperwork. So you need a computer, you're going to need a printer, you're going to need a file cabinet that does have your locked up employee files, or you need something with that. You'll need a safe. So bank account, you're going to have fees for your bank. How about 3 more?
You mentioned banking fees, also
cleaning supplies, menu printing.
Oh yeah, accounting fees, attorney fees.
Boom, there you go. All of those outsourced. So here we go. We haven't even opened our restaurant yet. We've already come up with 20 plus. You guys are starting to hit them all now. 20 plus expenses that we know, no matter what, we are going to have to deal with. So once you identify all of those common expenses, now you can start organizing your budget. And you want to group them into 3 categories. We want to put anything that has to do with food into 1 category. Anything that has to do with labor, it's its own category. And then I put everything else in what we call overhead expenses. So you got 3 cost categories that you're working with when you're starting to organize your budget. And there are industry standards on what those categories, should look at, what percentage of sales they should take up. So, sorry, I skipped the slide. Okay, let's start with food costs. Now, this is an industry standard. This is not across the board at every single restaurant, but in general, food costs is going to take up anywhere from 25 to 35% of your sales. Just hands down, just to bring the food in and have it to fill out everything on your menu. Your labor costs, anywhere from 30 to 35%. And I tell you, I'm in California, so we've got a high minimum wage. Most of my clients are really struggling, unless they're a franchise, like a fast food industry type of model. But most of my independent chains, they're running about a 36% food cost usually, if not a little bit higher. And we have to try to make it up by shaving down their food costs and making sure that those are really tight. But the labor cost is going to, again, take up another 30, 35%. Now, here's one that most places don't really think about. Rent should only be about 5 to 10% of your sales. So, I've gone into some places where the rent is 25% of their sales, 22% of their sales, and they can't figure out why they're not profitable. It's going into your rent. You've got either too big of a place or the location that you're at is just too expensive. So we really want to look at those numbers and make sure that the benchmarks, we're not exceeding the industry standards for those benchmarks without some way to compensate or offset it. Next thing I'll look at is the prime costs. And by definition, prime costs, that is your food costs plus labor costs. Those are your prime costs. Industry standard, it shouldn't take up more than 60 to 65% of your sales. So here we go. Out of the 100% of sales, 60 to 65%, it's already dedicated to 2 of the 2 areas of your restaurant, food and labor. You haven't paid rent, you haven't paid for any utilities, you haven't paid all of those other outsourced vendors, just food and labor costs. So when I start working with clients, these are the two areas that I always focus on. If I can even shave off 2 or 3% in this area, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars depending on the size of the restaurant, very easily. And sometimes it's just a couple of small changes that they need to make in how they're managing the floor. So again, prime cost is what you want to focus on and making sure it's staying under that 65% threshold. Now, why are these so important? Why should you even take the time to figure out your food costs? It is hands down one of the main ingredients to your long-term success. If you haven't figured out what your food is costing you, right? So what it costs you to make it, prepare it, you're not going to be able to set your menu prices. So you have to have confidence with that. You know, if I walk in and you've got a $22 dish on the menu, how much does it cost you to make? If you can't tell me that, then I already know we've got a problem with food costs. So you need to be able to set your menu prices based on your food costs. It's also going to help you manage your inventory waste. It puts a value on it. It's going to help you make sure that you're streamlining that. And then employee training. And this is a big one. Very often people don't realize, you know, if they just train their employees correctly with the right recipes and giving them the right tools, it can help them increase revenue tremendously. So you want to look at your food costs and have some analyzation on that for you.
So we have a question in the chat from Jared. How do you practice good menu pricing that makes the owner operator profitable?
Nice. So when you're setting your budget, you'll make a decision where you want to be in the food cost realm. And I actually teach a separate class that focuses just on food and labor costs. So look for that later on in the series. But without getting too far off of it, you may start looking at a 25% markup. Maybe it's 3 or 4 times what it's costing you. But you've got to take into account everything else with your location. You know, if you're in a place that is, let's say, LAX or an airport, I'm not going to cost out my menu items in a convenience store in an airport or a restaurant in an airport the same that I would cost at a brick and mortar that's just in a local neighborhood, because people will pay more for that convenience. I might be at a 15% food cost or a 20% food cost. And so when I set my menu prices, that's how I'm looking at it. I have a formula that I calculate out. If I'm in a location that's maybe a little more price sensitive, we'll just say maybe the demographics just can't afford a certain, menu price, I might be closer to a 32% or a 35% food cost, which means my prices are a little bit lower. I'm spending a little bit more on those items. So it really is a little more unique. I'd have to see the restaurant itself, see the competition around it, and just see what that demographic can manage. All right, so labor costs. I very often get asked, how do I calculate labor costs, and even how do I put it into my food costs? So I'm a believer in calculating my labor costs separately from food costs. The only time I will build it in is if the work model is, something that's an assembly line where you have to have so many units produced within a certain amount of time. So those meal prep companies or school lunches, things like that, then I will factor in some labor costs. But for all other brick and mortars, food trucks, we're looking at sales against our labor costs. We are going to stick to that 30 to 35%, unless, again, we're a franchise fast food area. Usually they're about 22, 25% labor costs. But the easiest way to help you calculate it is to create a mock schedule. You do this ahead of time, right? You have in your mind what you want your location to look like. So you're going to look at hours of operation. How am I open from 11 to 9? Am I open from 10 to 8? Am I open from 7 to 5? What are those hours of operation? When do I physically need people here taking care of my clients? But I'm also going to look at the prep time. How long does it take me to get open? If I'm a location that's open for breakfast at 7, do I need the cooks to come in at 5:30? Do I need them to come at 6? How much time do they need? But then also breakdown time. If we close at 8 or 9 o'clock, how much time does it take to get everything cleaned up? Everybody closes out their till. Do I need an hour and a half? So as I create that mock schedule, I'm looking at those parameters. I'm also looking at service style. Am I walking into the location and just going to a cashier and ordering my food and then getting a number, sitting myself at the table and just waiting for somebody to bring me the food, or calling on a loudspeaker and then I come up and go get my food? Or Am I coming in? Is there a host to greet me? When I sit down, is there a busser that brings me water? And then is there a server that takes my order? And is there a runner that brings my food? Do I have 4 people potentially touching this one table just to take care of me because of the elevated service level? You know, how many people do I need to bring that to life? Then also think about mandatory break times. You know, I'm more familiar with California and the Vegas break times, but think about, you know, what's unique to your city or your state. You know, do you have to have people on break by a certain time, or do you get charged a meal break penalty? Making sure you have enough people to cover those break times. And then what's your minimum staffing level? You know, what you would schedule for something for someone on Tuesday is very different from what you would schedule on a Saturday night. What's your skeleton crew look like? You know, what can I get away with bare bones staffing to still maintain those service level that I want? And then what's my labor budget? What can I actually afford? Right? So I may want to have 4 or 5 people touching the tables and helping out, but if I can only afford to have 3, what do I need those job descriptions to now say? Maybe you're a server that's also the host and the runner, or maybe you're a busser that's also a prep cook. So you need to look at that by creating a mock schedule ahead of time to give you an idea of what you're going to be working with from a labor cost perspective.
So we have another question in the chat from Reginald. With the growing minimum wage rates, how would you resolve the increase versus the need of the restaurant to ensure staying within the budget?
Okay, with the growing minimum wage, how would you resolve the increase versus the need of the risk of the restaurant? So interesting enough, there's probably no easy answer. The strategic thing that I've had to do with other clients is we had to change our service style. And we also had to change job descriptions. So you had to almost do a little bit more with less. You know, so some of those positions, you don't just have, you're not just doing this one thing, you're now doing this as well. And so the same thing with this other position. Instead of just doing this, you're now doing this. So instead of having 3 people, we have 2. So we're figuring out ways to do less, to do more with less. And then other things is changing the service style. You know, some of my clients here in California, even though we are now at a point where we can have 50% dine in, I've had some clients, they haven't gone back to any dine-in at all because the takeout model was so much more efficient and it allowed them to have less labor in place. So I do believe there's going to be a huge shift in what we see moving forward, what people are going to do. And even from a commercial real estate perspective, clients that are coming to me, I'm like, you don't need a huge dining room. You just don't, you know, unless you're doing fine dining and that's going to be the whole, you know, crust of your service, of your experience. People are going to be in this takeout mode or third party mode where they're not the actual person eating the food isn't even the person coming to the restaurant. So the experience is with the driver, not with your establishment. You know, you just need to make sure it's, you know, it looks good in the bag. Why are you going to invest all this money in a ton of real estate and building out a really fabulous location? So we've really gone to more of a streamlined business model. And then again, doing more with less. There have been, yes.
No, I was just saying that's a great point, and we may need to have another separate soul session on that another time, because I know they did a kind of an experiment with raising that minimum wage up to $15 in Seattle, and it kind of backfired on all the you know, the restaurant owners and the people were making even less than before because of how they had to cut the hours. So I know one thing they're planning, a lot of restaurants here in Texas are doing to kind of prepare for if that ever happens, is kind of 5-year and 10-year plans to raise their prices, you know, at not much, but gradually over time. So just want to bring that up. Yeah.
And I will just say, and this, you know, I guess a little mini soapbox for myself is, you know, the pandemic has been very bittersweet, and I don't want to, you know, say anything negative or to say that it is, you know, we deserve this or anything like that, but it literally ripped the Band-Aid off the food industry, the restaurant industry specifically, on everything that was wrong with what was going on that we knew. And even that's in the industry, we know all of our dirty little secrets. But now everybody knew what was going on. And it's like, wait a minute, how are you operating this way? So I feel that shift should be, we need to find a way to make it better, not a way to just kind of work people to the bone. So we're trying to figure out a way, how can this still be a livable wage? Because I've actually done some experimenting with a couple of clients who bumped up wages way before this started. I've got people who are bringing in folks at $20 an hour here in California, and they're hurting. They're like, I want to pay a livable wage, and I don't even think 15 is a livable wage. I want to bring people in at 20, and it's backfiring on this person. And we're trying to figure out a way to still make it work, because you can't reduce somebody's wages after you brought them in and they've been working for you for several months. So we want to make sure that we're being fair, but we just have to be smarter about it. And there has to be ways, even from vendors that are dealing with the restaurants, that they are more fair, because very often all of the people who are selling to restaurants are the ones making the most money. The people that are selling the signs, the people that are selling us our ingredients, the people that are, selling us our POS systems, they're the ones that are killing it. And then these poor restaurant owners are barely making ends meet, not taking a salary, or if they do take a salary, they're putting it back into the restaurant. So we just have to be smarter about this. And so my goal is really to figure out, how can we be more efficient? How can we get you from a 5% profit margin to at least 10% profit margin? It's not going to be leaps and bounds, but there are strategic things that you can do just from a back of house perspective to help you get there. Okay, so if some of these numbers kind of scared you, or this method scared you a little bit, I have a little tip that I do called backing into the numbers. I'm gonna give you a case study just so you can kind of see how this works. Let's say we're opening a Thai restaurant and we want to serve lunch and dinner from 11 to 9, so we're gonna be open for 10 hours. We're open 6 days a week, so we're closed on Monday. It's a dine-in concept, full service. We know our labor costs because we did our mock schedule ahead of time. We know our labor cost is 36%. We went through all of the recipes. We cost everything out. We know our food cost is right at 26%. And we are going to estimate that our monthly sales are $40,000. So we are going to budget for 10%. We're going to look for a location where 10% of our sales is our lease. So that's going to get me close to $4,000. So let's break this down. If my sales are $40,000, food cost is at 26%, multiply that times the 40, that's 10.4. Labor cost is at 36, multiply that times the 40, that's 14.4. And then the rent, we're estimating it to be at 10, so we're at 4,000. The remaining revenue for all of my overhead expenses before profit is right at 11.2. So how do I make sure I can hit this $40,000 in sales? What do I need to do from the back end to make sure I hit these numbers? Because if these benchmarks are okay, and I'm good with this, and I'm good with whatever comes after all of those other utilities and all that other overhead expenses come out, I want to make sure I can hit this $40,000 in sales. Here's what I've got to do. Got to break it down. So $40,000 a month, there's 4 weeks in a month. That's $10,000 per week. Okay. Remember, we're open 6 days a week. We're going to take that $10,000 a week divided by 6. That's $1,667 per day. We're open 10 hours. So that's $1,667 divided by 10. That's $166.66 per hour in sales. Okay. So that means my average check needs to be if my average check is $25, I need at least 67 people to come in every day that I'm open, every hour that I'm open, spending $25 so I can hit my $40,000, what I budgeted for the month. So if I'm that restaurant owner, or if I'm that restaurant manager, I'm checking the sales every hour. I'm checking to see, are we doing upsells? Are we getting people to get a combo? Are we offering dessert? What are we doing to make sure we're hitting this average check? Now, if my average check is $10, then we do the math the other way. I need more people to come in. But no matter what, these other numbers are not going to change. I just need to figure out how many people I can get in there. Or maybe I up my menu prices a little bit. Maybe now my average check is closer to 29. Now I can reduce how many people I need to come in every single hour. So you kind of want to back into the numbers to figure out, what do you need to hit to make sure that you're getting your sales that you need to be as profitable as you want to be. All right, so I want to take a look at an actual budget with you. Real life case study budget. It's going to be the Bluefish Grill. What you're going to notice on this budget is there are 4 columns. Okay, whenever you set up your budget, you should have a sales by category column, your actual data, and this is going to be everything that you pull from your POS system, Your invoices, or if you're using some kind of accounting software, is pulling real numbers for you. Your original projections, whatever you budgeted before you open, and then the variance between the two, the difference between your actual data and your original projection. So we have 4 columns in this budget that we're going to look at. So this is the Bluefish Grill. This is their profit and loss statement versus their actual budget, YTD year to date. So we've got our sales column. You'll see it's again broken down with our food. The next slide you're going to see is going to be the labor. And then the final slide will have the overhead expenses. The other thing I want you to notice on this budget is we've got a dollar sign and a percentage column. So it's extremely helpful to always have that the two, so you can see money and then how it measures up against your sales. For those, if you're not into accounting, there's a term that we like. We want to be in the black because that's positive. If we see something in red in parentheses, that's negative. We don't want to see red, right? So we want to always keep things in the black. So when I look at this P&L, I'm going to go line by line for a little bit. I won't do it on all of the slides, but I just want to point out a few things. So we've got food sales, $936,000, but what we budgeted for was $870,000. The variance between those two, in the black, $66,876. That's good. We did an extra, $66,000 that we weren't anticipating. So far, this is looking really solid. Soft beverage sales. Actual sales, 41.6, budgeted for 40. The variance between them, 16.90. So again, we're still in the black. Let's look at our beverage sales for liquor. And that also is broken down. You do want to have separate line items for each type of liquor that you're selling because that will help you out. So we've got liquor, draft beer, bottled beer, and wine. So liquor, 48.5, but we budgeted for 55. So yikes, we didn't sell as much liquor as we were expecting by $6,400. Look at the draft beer. 41, we budgeted for 35. Hey, we made up some money here. So they like the draft beer, $6,000, and we like that. That's good because we have a better profit margin on draft beer, right? Compared to our bottled beer sales. So bottled beer, 47 is what we actually did. We budgeted for 42. Okay, we didn't sell as much as we anticipated by 1,200. And then wine sales, here's where we found some ground. 72,000 is what we actually did, budgeted for 68, came in over at 4. So overall, and this particular location also has merchandise, which they grouped into their food because that was just their choice. But merchandise, they actually did 16.4, budgeted for 20,000. So didn't sell as many t-shirts as we hoped, but came in a little bit under at 35. So what I want you to notice is the total gross sales, actual 1.19, almost 1.2 million, budgeted for 1.13. The variance between the two, 67,000. Okay, so again, we're in the black. We made 67 grand more than we anticipated, but that's not the final story. There's comps and discounts. Maybe we had some people returning food. Maybe we had a promo where you got a free appetizer with, a dinner purchase, or, maybe this is some of our employee meals wrapped up in here. Either way, we've got to subtract that number out, all of our comps and discounts for the year. So actual was 34.5, budgeted for 30,000. So we spent a little more than we anticipated. Now, net sales, this is what we have left to work with the remaining expenses. 1.16 are the actual, 1.1 was what we budgeted. So almost $63,000 we're still above. So right now, if this was my restaurant, I'm like, oh, we're doing pretty good. We're high, above sales, above our budget sales. I go to the next page and I already can feel like the hairs on my back of my neck standing up. I see a lot of red. I see a lot of parentheses. So let's look at our food. Food spent $322,000 actually, but we budgeted for $278. We spent $43,000 more than we anticipated. And what I want you to look at are the numbers on the side of them, which are the parentheses, which are the percentages. So in the original column, the budgeted column, we budgeted for 32% food costs, but we came in at a 34.4. So only a 2.4% percentage difference made up $43,000. So when I go into a location to say, I want to try to move the needle by 2%, sometimes people are like, that's nothing, but it literally can be tens of thousands of dollars, just by moving the needle a couple of percentage points. Soft beverage sales, we see some red there. Beverage, again, we're seeing a little more red than black. Merchandise, if we keep going down to where it says total cost of sales, 391 is what we spent. We budgeted for 343. The difference is 49.6. So we budgeted for 30.4 overall, came in at a 32.3 on the food cost section. Let's look at our labor management. So that means that's somebody that's salaried, that's a contract. We talked about fixed expense. 91,055 is what we actually paid out, but we budgeted for 90,000. So why is there a difference? Why is this number off if we know we've got a contract? Well, if you've ever, owned a restaurant, you usually pay out an incentive to your general manager. So remember on that first page where the sales exceeded expectations, they probably got a bonus on that 1,055. A little pro tip, when you do a bonus or an incentive program, make sure you link it to a food cost and labor cost threshold as well. So it's not just based on sales. They also got to come in line with their food and labor costs. Okay, so hourly staff, we paid out $238,000, but we budgeted for $200,000. We spent an extra $38,000 on labor. Employee benefits kind of go there, but let's look at the total labor. Total paid out was $395. What we budgeted for was 35.3. Tried to be a little modest. We budgeted for a 32.2% labor cost, but we came in at a 34. So again, two percentage point difference, and we're at $41,000 that we spent over. We've got our prime costs, which remember prime cost is your food cost plus your labor costs together. Industry standard is between 60 and 65%. We budgeted for a 63.4. We came in at a 67.6. So that extra, percentage points, those percentage points there again amounted to an extra $91,000 that was spent. So now this was my restaurant. It's looking a little rough. Okay, let's go to the last section. And again, I won't go line by line with this, but we're going to fast forward to the end of the story, which is that net income. The first column, 98,387 is what we netted. This is what we put in the bank and we took home versus what we thought we would net, which was 138,345. So we estimated originally that our profit margin would be at 12.6%, but it actually came in at an 8.5%. Yikes. So we didn't make an extra 40,000 that we actually thought. Now, if you go back, I don't know if you remember what our original net sales were. 1.1 million were our original net sales. And what we actually took home as an owner, 98,387. So I want you to see those slim profit margins that we're talking about here. So actual versus reality. Now, if we had, done a better job about managing our expenses, we might have made almost an extra, $91,000. But that's not what we're going to focus on. I want you to tell me what were some of your key takeaways from this. If this were your restaurant and you had to budget or project for next year, what would you do differently? Very good. I clicked over and I can see the chat now. You have better labor man. Absolutely, Reginald. Anything else? Anything else we would try to work on in this particular restaurant? Mm-hmm. Lower profit margin. Please go back to screen two. Let me go back to screen two. Screen two, there we go. The red screen. There's one more thing I want you guys to notice. I'm gonna give you about 10 seconds and I'm gonna share my takeaways.
We have a couple. We have control more of the food costs. We also have lower profit margins in the first 3 years. And then somebody said add in comps.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So the one really positive takeaway was the sales did exceed expectations. So that's great. We want that. Okay. Big takeaway, profit fell below those budgeted expectations. Our food cost was 2.3% higher, which resulted in almost a $50,000 variance. Labor cost was 1.8% higher, so $41,000 variance. Prime cost overall was an extra 4.1, so we spent an extra 91,000. So if we only made 98, if we just managed our expenses a little bit more efficiently, we could have almost doubled that. So that's one of the big takeaways for me that I saw from this budget. So there's some things that you can do. There's tips that, I recommend that you start off with when you're starting this new restaurant to help you with the foundation. You've got to use technology, right? I've a couple of clients that early again in the pandemic didn't even have POS systems. So everything was, all orders were being done by hand. How can we manage things that way? Or, again, we talked about they didn't have the filing system. So use technology, invest in those systems. It's going to help you with gathering the data that you need very, very quickly. Be honest with yourself. If this is not your strong suit in that particular area, you can outsource it. You can hire that. And that can be said even for marketing, right? So not just in budgeting, that's a tip that you can use for other things. You have to put in your expenses daily and weekly, so that way you can get the information out quickly. So, I used to do manager meetings weekly with my team. If I don't have all of my expenses in there, I'm not going to give them the right data. And then look at your invoices for errors, especially with all the different vendors that we deal with in the industry. Even the big vendors. I'd have Cisco that said, "Okay, we sent you 3 cases, and they only sent me 1, but they charged me for 3." And if I don't have a system in place to catch those errors, somebody that's checking in the inventory, and then someone that's following up with that, I'm going to miss that. I'm going to end up paying out more money than I should. You can minimize, your AR debt. This is really more for my caterers. If you do a lot of catering, very often we'll collect a deposit, in the beginning, and then we should be getting money after we do that catering and get paid on it. But some places will do net 15, net 30, depending on the contract. And so if you're not following up with that, very quickly people will end up doing a net 65 on you, and you don't even realize it. So make sure you get your final payment immediately. This personally happened to me. Stay on top of any tax increases. The taxes went up and I didn't change the POS, so we weren't charging the right tax. And then guess what? That had to come out of my pocket. So I can't go back to those guests and ask them for that extra change that they owe me. So make sure you stay on top of it. Stay on top of the labor laws, wage increases. I had a client who unfortunately didn't increase the minimum wage when they were supposed to. And a person went and got a lawyer and found out. And guess what? They went and told a few of the other people, check your paychecks. And what do you know? Now we got a class action lawsuit. Now we're paying back pay for 3 months when you shouldn't have been. So make sure you stay on top of that. And look at your budget weekly. If you're not reviewing it and again, keeping your eye on the target, measuring it to the goals that you've set, making adjustments. If you're not looking at it, it's not staying in the forefront of your mind, it can very quickly get away from you. And then you look at it, a month later, and you're like, how come I didn't hit the number? You didn't hit the number because you weren't staying on top of it. So look at that, put these, tools, into your toolbox and use them. Some other tips, look at the costs per customer. And this is a big one. Question again for the group. Would you rather have 200 people coming into your establishment spending $10, or would you rather have 100 people coming in spending $20? Tell me what you prefer.
One more time, 10 people spending.
Would I rather have 100 people coming in spending $20 or 200 people coming in spending $10?
100 people.
Boom, very good. It's a lot easier on the business. It's the same money, right? 100 times 20 versus 200 times 10. But think of the extra labor that I would need to have, the addition, just the maybe space that I need to have. So if I can, get more out of the people that are coming to my establishment, the better, right? So we want to make sure we're analyzing those costs per customer, upsell. That's how you're going to increase your sales really overnight. Negotiate better prices from your vendors. If you've got vendors that are set up, not just your food vendors, everyone. You've got somebody that's cleaning your hoods. Do you have the best deal on that? You have somebody that's coming in and doing that preventative maintenance on your equipment. Do you have the right contract? Negotiate the best price you can. Crunch your numbers. Do some cost analysis. always look at your prime cost, because again, that's where those variable expenses are going to be found, and that's where you have the most wiggle room to make adjustments. You can make adjustments to your systems. Modify your service times. Maybe you're open too late, or maybe you've opened too early. You don't have the traffic coming in, so you can make those changes. Look at the service style. True example, I had a client, they had two different concepts. During lunch, it was very casual, and for dinner, it was fine dining. Well, they were losing money, just hand over the fist. They couldn't figure out why they were losing money. So I went in, kind of did some analysis. During dinner service, the menu was very, very cumbersome. They needed a lot of staff. There were times where I was shadowing in the kitchen. They had more people working in the kitchen than they had sitting in the dining room. And I just said, this service style doesn't make sense. I happened to come during lunch just to see, the difference between lunch and dinner. Lunch, they were doing a completely different, very casual. They had two people working in the kitchen. They did a casual, lunch service. And I said, well, why don't you just do this same lunch service for dinner? I mean, people obviously like the food. They'll come back for dinner, or different people will come for dinner and enjoy it because they can't come for lunch. They didn't want to do it. And unfortunately, they're not in business anymore. And we did everything possible. We trimmed down the front of house as much as possible. The chef would not budge. He would not cut any of his staff. He was absolutely, he was just unmovable. And so unfortunately, I really do believe if they just changed their service style, they'd still be open by now. You have to minimize turnover. If you are constantly having people coming in and out that you're hiring, firing, you're just not investing in sourcing the right candidates, it is going to cost you money. Every time you hire somebody, even if they only last you for a week or two, and then you got to stop and hire somebody else, it's costing you money. So do what you can. Maybe look internally. If you have high turnover, which is very typical in our industry, but if you have high turnover, sometimes there's a reason. Sometimes there's an issue. There's a shift that needs to happen in the culture of the restaurant. It's not just people just don't like working in restaurants. I've had employees that have worked for me 6, 7, 8 years, and they were very happy, very content, and they didn't have an issue. And I've had colleagues where every month 2 or 3 people were leaving. And so figuring out what's going on in that particular establishment. And then you can always consider downsizing your location. Maybe you put together your budget and it's just not jiving. It's not making sense. Maybe you're trying to put something that should be in a small takeout location into this big dining room. And another client completely similar situation where great food, great ambiance, service was excellent, but when you walked in, the location was just too big. It always looked like it was half empty. So when you walk in as a guest, it feels like, oh, should we be in here? There's nothing going on. There wasn't an energy. There wasn't excitement. It was just too big. And so there was just a lot of dead space. And so if they just kind of picked their concept and put themselves in like a little small, instead of having, a 50 table restaurant, having a 10 table restaurant, it would look like it was jamming all the time. They'd have a line out the door, best marketing with that, and it was just a matter of the location itself. So consider downsizing your location. So I've shared a lot, but I'd love to hear some feedback on some things that maybe the audience members have done. You can share what's worked for yourself. What worked for yourself and your locations, with helping you either with your budget projections, or if you're just starting out, maybe some tips that you have as well. You can go back to the top page. This is tip page 1, and then I don't know if you need a tip page 1 or tip page 2. I'll do both. And I like what you said, Jared. 200. It can go both ways. 200. So in the example I'm giving, I'm talking about the money, not so much about the reach. You definitely want more people coming in, more people posting, more people, it's word of mouth, absolutely. But I just meant in general, as far as check average, looking to increase your check average.
I do have a question. This is Jared. Do you think that you could groom your your customers and build a culture to where you're like a limited, um, I guess a limited restaurant to where you're not really open from 11 to 10 p.m. like a typical restaurant? Because I just believe in this climate that COVID had caused the restaurants to adjust on on their regular operations. Like you just don't have to stay open as long as you have to.
Yeah, you don't. I've got places that, cut their hours instead of being open till 9. They cut to 7 because just during COVID, and they haven't gone back because it's now more manageable from a labor perspective. So absolutely, you can groom. That's why right now a lot of restaurants, they'll close one day a week because it's just more manageable for the labor. They're not having to worry about overtime as often. They give the business a chance to breathe, to rest, because it can be grueling for some of those positions. Most restaurant owners will tell you, it's a minimum 12, 14, 16-hour day. If you're a chef, it's the same thing, 14, 16-hour day. So when you do have, a closed day, people will absolutely adjust to that. I mean, everybody knows Chick-fil-A is closed on Sunday. I mean, period.
Right.
You make sure to not go on Sunday. You go when they're open.
Now, I do have a question about food costs.
Mm-hmm.
Say if you're a restaurant that sells out of food and your customers are complaining about why you're always selling out. Now,
Mm-hmm.
does adding more food, does that necessarily mean that you're going to be more profitable? Because I know that adjusts the food cost because you got to buy more food, and then that's more labor to um, prepare the food too as well.
So
So,
if you are consistently running out of food, then that is an inventory problem. That is not a food cost problem. So the food cost itself, that's, if you have a food cost problem, it could be you probably haven't priced out your menu correctly compared to what it costs you. You may have a theft problem going on. And this I actually cover in the food cost class, but we can touch on it here. I've gone into restaurants where if you've got a cashier that is pocketing, $50 a day every time they work their 5 shifts, it's going to affect your food costs. May not have anything to do with, overportioning. Another issue with food costs is you could have employees that are overportioning. I've gone to places where I know we costed out this recipe and I know what it should cost. You should be running this food cost. Well, guess what? Every time, this employee works, it's double portions, and on every plate that they're putting out. So that's why we're having an issue with food costs in this particular location. It could be inventories walking out if you have a food cost issue. If you're not counting your inventory and your team knows that, and they want to have a party and they want to take a couple of extra things home with them, maybe some prime rib, whatever, that's going to show up in your food costs. So if you're having issue with food running the menu constantly, you're constantly running out of something, then that's an inventory problem. And that can be adjusted based on upping your par levels. So you can run reports from your POS system that tells you how many of each dish that you sell, and you can readjust what you're preparing, what you're prepping. Because there might be something that, let's say you have, 10 menu items, and all 10 of them you prep 40 portions of each. Well, maybe, menu item numbers 1, 2, and 3 always sell out, but 4, 5, and 6, you always have like 12 or 30 or 12 or 15 extra. And then the other menu items are really close. When we need to adjust 1, 2, and 3, we need to up those par levels to maybe 60 each. And then we need to decrease the par levels for 4, 5, and 6. So we're going to have the same amount of labor because it's the same amount of work, but we're just reassessing how much more we're prepping for each category. And usually we just need somebody to look at that. Sometimes it's just easier to have an outside person take a look at your business and give you a little bit of feedback versus the person that's actually working in it and kind of just in the grind day to day. They just can't see it the same way. So usually we'll have to do like a menu engineering, review your reports and just see what's selling.
okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so adjusting your hours to what fits best for your demographic area you need, my being consistent with great trade will always increase sales. Word of mouth is paramount. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Agreed, agreed, agreed. All right. Tip page. Oh, tip page 2. Yes. Let me go back. And then hopefully, once we get the food and labor costs meeting schedule, we'll send that out to you guys, and you can join us for that, because they go into a lot more detail on food and labor costs, which is just, that's an hour into itself.
And Asia, don't forget to drop your email and info in the chat in case anybody needs your services.
Okay. Okay. Absolutely.
You have somebody said, just share your number because you sold us a long time ago. That's what everybody's looking for. Contact information. We love it. We love it.
Oh, good, good. All right. So here's my LinkedIn. Here is my IG, and then email Asia at askasia.com. But if you do have any other questions about what else is coming up in the Feed the Soul organization, new classes, please email info@feedthesoulou.org.
Yes, perfect. And so we will actually, to everybody that's viewing, this is a bi-weekly free webinar. So we'll be putting out another one in 2 weeks, and then every 2 weeks until August. So look out for that. And we will definitely post this webinar on our website, like I mentioned in the chat. So if you want to come back and learn and watch this, visit feedthesoulfou.org. And be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you all. Thank you so much. It's Feed the Soul and Asia Beard.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Asia. Thank y'all for coming. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Asia. Thank you all for hosting this. This was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So glad it's helpful.